right, and with that we should be live. Today we're talking about gas shocks, and gas shocks can be a little bit of a complicated topic. Certainly can be a bear of a project to try to add to a boat, but I want to talk today about the most common case, which is when your gas shocks go bad and you need to find a replacement. So Matt, I know you've talked to a lot of different people trying to replace gas shocks. Talk to me about, I guess the first thing is I got to figure out what the size is, right? What the length is.
100%. Length of the shock.
Measure those?
You measure the length of the shock from center to center of the mounting points. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the easiest way to do it. When they're extended, there is a compressed measurement as well, but we usually identify our shocks on the website by the extended length.
Because it's easier to measure, right?
100%.
You don't have to push it down to be able to measure.
Exactly.
So when you say the mounting points, you mean the center of this ball?
Correct. The center of the socket.
Okay.
Center of the socket to the center of the socket. And after we have that, we usually ask for any identifying marks that are on the shock so we can figure out how strong the shock was. A lot of times it's not easily identifiable because the part number for the shock is so long and confusing, but one of those numbers in there usually identifies the strength of the shock, and we go based off what we find out from our customers.
So obviously shocks have different holding strengths. You've got everything from 10 pounds up to, I think we do have a 90-pound shock on the table. So you're saying, okay, you realize your shock's broken.
Yeah, it's not holding up whatever you needed to hold up.
So you open up your lid, let's say you pull it off, and we'll go into how to pull it off. You measure it, you figure out the distance between the ball sockets, but now you got to figure out what the weight even was, and because it's broken, it's not like you can measure what it was.
Can't put it on a scale.
So like this one, for example, is SL10-10-1. Right. You're thinking that's probably a 10-pound shock?
That's going to be a 10-pound shock in my experience.
And I think there were some others that had maybe a -30, and there's a couple different manufacturers. In fact, there's at least 2 different manufacturers of gas shocks on the table here. And for the most part, you're able to kind of look at it and figure out what it is. And 100%. Of course, someone could call us, I suppose, right? And talk to any customer service agent, read the part number, try to figure out what it is.
Exactly. We can all work through it together. Okay,
so cool. So you figure out what length gas shock, you figure out the weight. At that point, we come online, you're able to buy exactly what you need.
We match it up. We get you fixed up. We send it out to you.
So
now you've got it.
Right.
And you're going to put it on. Or you're popping off the old one, putting the new one on. Some of them are going to be a little bit more confusing when you get them than others. Some are going to be a lot more self-explanatory. For example, this particular Ameritool shock, when we ship it, the actual piece that locks the socket around the ball is flipped around and covering the hole. So you can see here the hole is visible because I've flipped it around. I've actually pulled this cover off. I'm actually going to pop it off so I can show you guys real quick.
So use a screwdriver, flathead screwdriver, kind of pry it loose.
Exactly. So this is just a little cover that is over the hole because there's a little bit of oil or grease that's inside here to keep the socket moving freely on the ball throughout the lifespan of the shock, and they use it as a dust cover in shipping. What you're going to do is you pop those off, and then you reveal the hole on the socket that's going to pop right onto the ball. So if I was going to demonstrate it for you, these simply just pop right on. You got one of your brackets and the socket, you just squeeze it, and it snaps right in place.
Takes a little bit of force, right?
Takes a little bit of force. Yeah. It will pop on. It will pop off. It's not necessarily super easy for this particular shock. Some are easier than others. But then once the ball is in the socket, you just use that locking dust cover. It fits right into the holes on the back of the socket, and it locks it right in place. You just push it all the way on there, and you're good to go.
So if you ever need to change it again, I imagine you're removing that, because that helps lock it down on the ball socket?
Exactly. So what you would do is you would come in with a flathead screwdriver, and there are some little marks where you can get underneath it. You can see right here. And you just pry it loose, pop it off, and give it a little tug. It'll pop right off the ball, and you can replace the shock.
Okay. And so for the most part, and I know there's exceptions to this. Maybe you got just a bad bracket. But for the most part, customers are not, boat owners are not changing out their brackets.
Yeah, the brackets don't go bad as nearly as much as the shocks do.
So this is going to be mounted just to some wherever, right? It can be mounted anywhere.
It can be mounted on the inside of your hatch lid, the gutter rail. A lot of the flat ones you'll see mounted on the inside of the gutter rails, kind of facing down like this. And The other side might be another bracket on the underside of the lid that would look like this. So you have one here on the inside of the rail and another on the underside of the hatch connected by the shock. 99% of the time, the brackets are still good.
So quickly, he demonstrated how you change out one specific brand. There are some others. This one actually has a little, I don't know, what would you call that? It's like a little clip, like a molded clip that goes around the back. You do the same thing where you put a flathead screwdriver in. Let's see. So this one's a little bit of a pain, right? You
that one,
the hard one.
That one's the more difficult one, yeah.
Right. So you pull this, and now it's opening up that teeth a little bit. You can see I'm twisting this to make it loose. You push it on, and then you let it close back down and tighten back down. But for the most part, and I know you're more familiar with gas shocks than myself, you think it's somewhat intuitive once you get it and kind of see how it how it loosens and how it tightens back down.
Yeah, generally speaking, the only time you're really going to need to mess with the spring on this is what I'm going to call it, or the locking spring, is when you're removing it. These ones are pretty simple to install. They really just snap right on. You just pop it on there. But removing them can be a little bit more of a challenge, getting that screwdriver head underneath it, pulling that spring back, and then pulling on the shock at the same time.
Okay. And then, clearly we have two different gas shocks here. It looks like, okay, they're not the same length, but they're obviously also different materials, right? So this one is stainless steel, and this one is a black painted. What is the material?
Black painted steel.
It's black painted steel. So for the most part, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have just about all the different sizes in both stainless and the black painted. There might be some very few exceptions.
There's some exceptions to that, and we inventory the shocks that we use in our everyday manufacturing.
Right.
So there are some that we don't carry in inventory, but generally speaking, we have access to get them.
So and then. It's fair to say that this lasts a fair amount longer than the black painted.
Much longer.
What
depending on the application.
Sure, yeah, and I bet the more use it gets, the faster it wears out. But as a general rule, the stainless is more durable. Why what is it about the steel? Is it actually rusting or?
The steel shocks will definitely rust much quicker than a stainless one will, especially in a saltwater environment. So, for example, boat builders were putting gas shocks on live well lids. On the underside of live well lids that are getting filled with salt water, they're using stainless steel shocks, but even the stainless shocks in those applications might last 1 to 2 years because they're getting so much exposure.
Sure.
Whereas a stainless shock on an electronics box door where it's usually closed in an enclosed area, I've got some on my boat that are 13 years old now. And
so I wouldn't say these are low quality though. It's more. I kind of equate it to a plastic flush latch that might last 3 years, or a stainless flush latch that might last a decade or more. And let's just real quick. I'm going to flip over here to the gas shocks. Go ahead.
Even in the automotive industry, you're not going to find a stainless steel shock. So all the shocks that are on your trunk lid or the back tailgate for your SUV, they're all black painted shocks. It'll just to give you a point of reference of how long you can expect the painted shocks to last.
Gotcha. So it looks like the screen share wasn't working, but I am looking at the gas shocks page here on the site, and it does look like the stainless is in the area of 2 times the cost. But you're not talking about a ton of money. You're talking about the difference between on a 7.5 gas shock. A stainless one would be $35, and the black painted one would be $15, right? So you're talking about maybe $15 difference. So that's a judgment call, personal preference. But let me ask you this: so you measure it, you figure out that it's 7. You look at it, you figure out that it's 20, and yours is black painted. There's no reason that you can't upgrade to the stainless.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
So the ball sockets are all a 1-for-1 from a standpoint of what we carry.
At this point, I have not run into a situation where someone had a different size ball socket. All of the shocks that we carry and the mounting brackets that we keep in inventory use a 10 millimeter ball.
Okay.
Everything, like I said, I have yet to run into a situation where I've had a customer who was looking to replace their shock and it was a different size socket or ball.
So upgrading from black painted to stainless, no problem. That's totally a personal preference. We talked a little bit before the show about upgrading from you measure, you realize that they have a 10-pound, and you feel like for whatever reason that didn't hold it up quite as much as it should.
Or maybe you just want more force.
Maybe you want more force. Could you go to a 20-pounder? And we would recommend to avoid that unless you had a very compelling reason and we're willing to accept a little bit of risk associated with that. And the reason we say that is because we have found, even in the prototype process, prototyping our parts, where you overpower a gas shock and you create some bowing in the hatch, right? So we're very particular when we're engineering a part with where we put the different mounting points and just how much force we use, whether we use a 10 or 20 or 30, to make sure that we don't come back after 2 weeks in the sun and realize that, oh darn, that whole door where the gas shock is pushing, remember there's constant force behind it, right? So that whole area is now bowed up. So in general, I would recommend steering clear of going higher just because you want to, but certainly you can go to stainless.
The only other reason that you could argue for a compelling reason not to do it is considering what kind of mounting situation your brackets have as well. Because if you're going to increase the strength of your shock, you want to make sure the brackets can handle it, and whatever the brackets are mounted to can handle it as well.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about actually, it's not that the bracket itself would break, but the pulling out, you don't know if that was through bolted or if there was just some lag screws put down.
If this particular bracket just had tap screws going through here and you had a 10-pound shock on it and went to a 20 or 30, and then maybe that force would cause this bracket to pull those screws out.
Now you do need to replace the mounting.
Now you do need to replace it.
So that covers 99% of gas shock contacts we get on the website. It's, hey, my gas shock went bad. Maybe it just lost all the holding strength, or maybe it's binding as it's closing. I need to replace it. Need a new gas shock. From time to time, we do get the question of, hey, how do I add a new shock? My builder didn't put a gas shock in this area. I really want to have a gas shock. And that's a lot more complicated of a project. I would say, and this is horrible because we love every call and appreciate every call. Those are one of the most challenging questions to get asked. And the problem is because there's just almost no way that we can help them remotely without being there and being able to play with it. So
exactly.
So to give our best effort though, let's do the kind of mental process of, okay, Matt, you wanted to add a gas shock to an electronics box, let's say, on your boat, and there's not one there. What are you starting with? And let's operate under the assumption that you are Matt Porter, sales manager at Boat Outfitters, and you can grab one of each of these 4 different size shocks and you can go down to your boat and play with it. What are you doing?
I'm measuring the size of my hatch first, getting an idea for what size shock is really going to get me in the range for what I need. Okay. I'm looking at my mounting areas, either on the back of the hatch and also inside that electronics box, if it's on my T-top.
Right, like do you even have a vertical spot to put this? Can you get it in the area?
Exactly. What kind of bracket, what do I need to do to even put a shock on here and get it in the location that it needs to be? The next thing I'm looking at is, I know that our prototype manager uses some of the we keep broken shocks in stock so we can measure where those mounting points really need to fall. I might even grab one of those. Even I have one on the table here. It's just a broken shock, but anybody could create something like this at home. It's just a little bit more complex.
So back up though, because I think we might have skipped a little bit. So let's pretend like the door is open, right?
Okay, yeah.
And you have this gas shock, right? And you start figuring out, okay, I want this point to be here on the door, and I want this point to be somewhere inside.
And where's that going to be? And what bracket do I need to fit there?
So, like, if you set that there, right? Maybe this is attaching to a ball socket on the door, and this is attaching somewhere. Maybe it's to the bottom of an e-box.
Sure.
Right. The next thing you have to figure out is, one, will this close? Right.
Right.
Now. Even if I put it at a point where I want the door to be, maybe the door's sitting here and this is going to mount down here, okay, that's well and good, but if I stay at those 2 points, because it will once it's mounted there, will my door be able to close all the way? So how do you do that?
Are you going to exceed the compressed length of the shock?
Right, because it only has so much play to compress.
Right.
So how are you going to measure that?
So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have when we have customers on the phone is I really don't have a good way to tell you how to measure it.
It's inside the box.
Right. You can't get inside the box. So if I were doing it, I'd probably mark where that ball is on the back of the door, and I would know what the distance is from the end of the door, right? And then from the end of the door, I would measure that distance to the other mounting ball.
Sure.
So
yeah, like
that
set something up and maybe measure from that point down.
Right. Or
Yeah.
just I would measure where the ball falls in relation to where the door is, put a mark on the door, and I know where it is, where the other one on the door would be, so I'd put a mark there. I'd measure what that gap is, and hopefully that isn't smaller than what the compressed length of the shock is.
So that does get into the where it's really nice to have the broken gas shock, right?
100%.
Because that allows you to maybe even, double stick tape them in place or something,
Right.
and close it and see if it's going to close. The long and short of it is it's not at all impossible, and we have customers who do it, but it's definitely a trial and error thing. It's not an exact science. It's a little bit of a, that didn't work, this is going to work. And it's almost never something that we're able to provide a lot of insight, given the fact that we're not with you on the boat, trying to figure it out. We have some times where people send us pictures of this area and they're like, hey, help me figure out how to put a gas shock here. And I just,
we can generalize, like say for example it was a bow hatch on like a 19-foot center console, right? And they want to open that hatch to 90 degrees and want it to stay there. Generally speaking, we can get within the range. I can say, okay, well, if the hatch is 20 inches long, you can probably use a 15-inch gas shock and open the hatch up, get it marked where it's going to go. You're going to be using, this is a longer shock, this is a 23-inch shock, but you're going to say, okay, I want the ball here and I want the ball here, and then you're going to be able to say, okay, this point on the hatch up here, when it's closed, is going to be here compared to where it is on
where it's mounted
for the mounting on the rail.
But then you do get into things like weight, right? If you've got enough weight to hold it up.
So the first thing that I look at if I'm looking at a situation like this is getting the right length shock first. I don't even think about the weight until I know that I have the right length figured out.
Which is probably good, because you could always size up. Like if a 15-inch shock is what you need, you start at a 20, you can change it for a 30, 40, until...
Right. And then going from there, I mean, the only other things to really consider is for the shock that you're selecting, you're going to need to use a stronger shock the closer that your mounting point on the door is to the hinge point of that door.
Because it's heavier at that point than it is further out on the door.
The way that I like to explain it to my customers is it's like, try to break a pencil. Break a pencil in half. Okay, now take one of those halves and break it in half. Okay, now take one of those halves and break it in half. And it gets harder and harder and harder the shorter it is.
Sure.
So the closer you are to that hinge, the much more strength you're going to need out of your shock in order to keep that hatch open.
Yeah. So have you had people that did it and were successful, who bought a gas shock for it, that reached back out, hey, it worked awesome, I was able to figure it out?
Yeah, one in particular was a guy who was building an enclosure to cover a TV on the outside of his house in his entertainment area, like on his patio. Yeah, it was a really cool project.
Cool. So this isn't meant to discourage you. I know we sound a little bit negative on it, and we don't mean to sound that way at all. It's absolutely something that's possible. It's just someone has to come into it prepared that they're not going to start knowing all the answers. It's going to be a little bit of a, okay, does this work? Well, let's measure and see, and yeah, it does, or maybe it doesn't, and if you drill the wrong holes, you patch them and start over. So totally possible, but definitely more complicated than just buying an exact replacement. Real quick, before we end, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the alternatives, and I know you have some of those, Matt. So if someone didn't want to do a gas shock, but they wanted to accomplish the same thing, what are some options?
So I'll start with the closest thing to a gas shock that we also carry on the website. It's this lid stay. You'll notice the lid stay has a couple mounting brackets already attached to it, one for the door, one for the inside of the opening. The way these work is they just extend all the way out, and when they extend all the way out and they start to compress again, they have a little catch pin inside them that keeps them from reclosing. And then in order to close them, you just pull it all the way out again, and that mechanism rotates inside the housing, and then it allows it to close all the way again.
So it's open catch, open close.
Open catch, open close. Exactly. So
they're not any easier than gas shocks, though, for the most part, are they?
They're not any easier as far as mounting is concerned, but they are easier in the sense that you don't have to figure out what strength shock you need. I can tell you that these are generally rated around 30 pounds of pressure per lid stay. So it's give or take a few pounds on that. And so they do a good job there just knowing how much force is going to be exerted on it.
Any issues with bouncing?
You would definitely have issues with bouncing on that.
Okay. So I thought I had heard that. I want to make sure. So, you're running and it's holding up the lid, and you hit a wave and it goes dum, and slams back down.
Exactly.
So I'm not a huge fan of these things. I want to show it just so that you know it's an option.
Right. They do work, and they work better in applications where you're not necessarily running the boat. Maybe, gosh, what would be a really good application? An electronics box door would be good that's clear, that you don't intend to leave open.
Sure.
Would be good, where
just
you can open it up. Yeah, exactly. The next closest option would be like a stainless steel spring lid stay. And all this really does, or a spring holdup, I guess. Same deal, same type of mounting system as what you saw in the lid stay, just flat on one side and 90 degrees on the other. And these particular ones, the ones that we carry, have a stainless steel cable that runs from mount to mount inside here, so you can't pull them apart. They won't stretch on you, which is actually really nice if you were to use this on a live well lid, which a lot of boat builders do. The good thing is if you forget to latch that live well lid and that thing flies open, the spring isn't just going to stretch and let that fold all the way back, break your hinges, and break it off of the boat. This will actually catch it.
So this is just such that when there's force here and here, the springs won't fold.
Exactly.
And then when you do fold, it falls down. That's
right.
the gist. Let me turn to the side. So it's locked out, then it's fold, and it sits. So this is the closed position. This is the open position.
Yeah. The nice thing about this is once you know where you want it to, the angle of your lid you want to be when it's open, you can just put it right there, mark your mounting points, and you're really not super concerned about a compressed length on this because it will fold on itself. Okay. So that's one of the nice things about this.
So one negative that we have to address with this that I have heard of some negative stories is you can get to where in the locked position maybe someone bumps this and the 100%. Whole thing slams down on your head, right? Because I mean it's binary. Either it's in the locked position or it's falling on you. So
especially if somebody were, like, say for example, someone was closing the hatch and they hit the spring from the inside out and the hatch closed on the spring.
Right.
Okay, now the spring is bent and it's really not going to hold anything up. That's kind of a downside. You really want to. This is a situation where if you have a heavy hatch, you either want to make sure that everything's clear. You know, say for example, like a live well lid again. If you're reaching your hand in there and somebody bumps it, that lid's coming down on your hand.
Yeah.
So that is a definite negative. You know, somewhat similar in the sense with the lid stay, where it's not going to stay open on its own. If it were to pull up, you know, when it bounces, it's going to come down on you too. So couple of negatives, but
they have their
bright
place.
sides
we
too.
use them. I mean,
bright
they're
sides
out there.
too.
Yeah. So the last one is in my opinion by far the best if you can figure it out. And we've had a couple episodes about it, so we'll go quick on it. But what are we looking at?
The friction hinges. A lot of the boat builders are foregoing gas shocks and moving to friction hinges because one, that there's so much thought that goes into a gas shock in order to get the right length, the right strength, making sure all your mounting points are right, that the friction hinges, they put them on until they have enough and send it out the door. But there is a little bit of a guessing game with these as well.
On the retail side, I would agree. But yeah, on the OE side, the other beautiful thing is you don't impede your opening at all, right?
100%.
I mean, with your gas shock, you are limiting the you have this thing that's in the area, right? It's taking up some degree of space, and then it also is a mechanical thing that can fail, can rust, can be replaced, and so can your friction hinges as well. But I would say that those, for the most part, have a longer lifespan than certainly this.
Right. Especially in a saltwater environment.
For sure. So yeah, I mean, gas shocks are a great alternative, friction hinges are a great alternative to gas shocks, and definitely something that you should consider if you're trying to figure out how you can hold your door open.
Just the quick key points to friction hinges. I know we've covered it in other episodes, but if you were going to loop it all in here, 1, you got to be able to through bolt them. 2, they're really strong. But the question that you ask yourself, do I want this to stay open at 90? Do I want this to stay open at 45?
Sure.
And, you're going to need either more hinges or a smaller door.
Right. If you expect to be able to open your door and have it sit at 45 where there's a lot of weight way out here,
right,
then you're going to need a lot of hinges. Or, hey, I just want to be able to open it and it not slam shut.
Right.
So I'm totally with you there. Got a couple questions. So how can we tell what force my gas shock is? So Jared asked that. We covered that at the beginning, but it's a really good thing to hit back on. So in the part number on the gas shock, you'll generally be able to find a indicator. Like this one I have is SL10-10-1. I think you have one that's something -30-1.
Yeah, this particular one is 750-105-90.
That's a 90-pound gas shock. That's a monster right there. I think that's the heaviest one that we have.
It is.
So generally, you're able to find it in the part number. That would be the best place to look. Let's see here. Jeff asked, do you have any automated gas shocks that operate from a switch?
That's a good question.
We have prototyped for different boat builders some different parts that run off of actuators that pull out. Like we did one for, gosh, who was it?
Was it Intrepid?
Contender, Intrepid. I forget which.
Jupiter?
I'm not sure, but
yeah.
We'll find it out and put it in the comments down below. But we have done a full like wet bar. It had a grill and a sink and a nice Corian countertop. The whole thing came out on actuators. It's actually in our IBEX booth that's coming up here in a little bit.
Right.
We've done some cooler slides on actuators.
Yeah.
So yes, we have some where we're doing a similar thing, right? We're automating the opening of something via a tool and using a switch. I wouldn't say that that's something that we like have online ready for sale.
Not something online ready for sale. Not necessarily a gas shock either. Really just an actuator that's going to move something in and out.
Correct.
Where a gas shock is really just designed to hold something open.
Yep, I would agree with that. So Jared asks, can these gas shocks be used for car hatches as well? You know the answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly could. There's really no difference between a gas shock here versus one you're going to find in like an auto parts store.
Right.
Now, there may be some slight differences as far as like the mounting heads are concerned, and I can tell you in my experience replacing gas shocks in the marine industry, I haven't run into a situation where the ball or socket was a different size. I don't know that to be the case in the automotive industry.
Sure.
But it is possible. However, I don't think you're really going to find very many stainless steel shocks in an automotive retailer.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So Jared asked a follow-up question, which is a very reasonable and good one. So what if the part number cannot be read on the gas shock, and I'm trying to figure out what the weight is? I have had that happen once or twice, and I'll give my answer, and then you can tell me if your answer is different.
Sure.
I think it's been a little bit of best guess and adjust is what I've done. Right,
100%.
I've said, hey, let's kind of look at what that is.
How long is the shock? How big is the hatch? How much do you think the hatch weighs? Where does it attach? And okay, based off that information, I'm just going off what I've seen in the past. You probably need like a 40-pound shock for that.
But be ready to say it's too heavy, and we'll exchange it.
Or it's not enough.
Or it's not enough. And for returns and stuff like that. We offer no question returns. We'll exchange the stuff with you. We do ask that you pay the return shipping, which shouldn't be but probably $5-6 or so, and we'll work with you in that instance. If you really don't know what the weight is, we'll try to give you the best advice. We've even had some people order two, maybe a 20 and a 30, and then send back
with whichever
the 30.
one they like.
And send it back. So that's my advice. If you really it's rubbed off and you can't see it, it's probably a trial and error game.
Yeah.
Cool, guys. Well, this was a lot of stuff about gas shocks. If you have any other questions, as always, put them down in the comments. Let us know. We've got an exciting topic next week. We're actually going to be showcasing some of the new pontoon accessories that we've been prototyping for some of the different builders that should be on the new 2020 model year boats. So we're excited about that one, but we're always open to suggestions on other topics that you'd like to see covered, and I'd love to continue the conversation in the comments down below. So thank you very much.